I never expected to run into Richard Thompson in my law firm after all these years. The very sight of him sent a jolt through my system. He was unmistakably the same person who had made my life hell in high school. Here he was, working as a paralegal. The moment he recognized me, that familiar smirk spread across his face, bringing back a flood of unwanted memories.
"Well, if it isn't Stevens,"
he sneered, his voice carrying that same condescending tone I remembered all too well.
"What makes you think you belong here? This isn't some place for dropouts."
Excuse me? I kept my voice level, though my patience was wearing thin. The years of therapy and personal growth threatened to crumble in his presence.
"Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once."
He leaned in closer, that same arrogant expression I remembered from high school plastered on his face. His cologne was overpowering, another power play I supposed.
"This firm handles cases for politicians and CEOs. We don't deal with broke losers. Besides, you probably can't even afford our retainer."
I'm now officially married to Sarah, and working as James's right-hand man at the firm. It's remarkable how life can change, from a traumatized high school dropout to a successful attorney. Each morning when I walk into our office, I'm reminded of how far I've come. Slowly but surely, I'm growing in this field. The cases we handle become more complex, the challenge is more nuanced, but the fundamental truth remains the same. We're here to help people who need it most. I know well enough what little old me can do is limited. Every case we win, every client we help, is balanced by those we couldn't save. But that's probably true for everyone. We humans aren't gods. We're always powerless in some way. Sarah reminds me of this whenever I get too caught up in a difficult case, just as I remind her when she faces her own challenges. It's impossible to save everyone we see. The legal system, like life itself, isn't perfect. That's exactly why we keep pushing forward, why we keep fighting for justice, one case at a time. These small humans can evolve one step at a time. Each victory, no matter how small, contributes to something greater. Each client we help becomes someone else's James Anderson, extending a helping hand when it's needed most. That's why we're equipped with energy called effort. It's what drives us forward, what helps us overcome our past traumas and faces new challenges. Well, time to keep working hard today too. Another case awaits, another chance to make a difference. Believing that each step leads to saving someone else. That's the principle that guides me now, just as my parents' teachings guided me then. And somehow, I think they'd be proud of where those principles have led me. His attitude hadn't changed one bit since high school. I let out a quiet sigh and looked around, trying to ignore him. The modern office space around us, with its sleek glass walls and mahogany desk, felt worlds away from those high school hallways. Yet here we were, replaying the same old scene. That's when he grabbed my shoulder roughly, his fingers digging into my suit jacket.
"Hey, are you deaf? This isn't a place for trash like you."
The fabric of my jacket crinkled under his grip, and for a moment, I was transported back to those painful school days. But before he continued his tirade, a familiar voice rang out, clear and confident. "Oh, you're back!" A beautiful woman, our firm's executive assistant, rushed over to me, her heels clicking purposely against the polished floor. What happened next made Thompson's face turn pale as a sheet, and I have to admit, the look of shock on his face was somewhat satisfying. Let me back up a bit and explain how we got here. I, Michael Stevens, grew up in a perfectly ordinary middle-class family in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Tokyo. Our house wasn't fancy, just a modest two-story home with a small garden where my mother grew vegetables, but it was filled with warmth and love. My dad works as an accountant in a mid-sized company. My mom had a part-time job at the local supermarket, and we lived a modest but comfortable life. My parents were the kindest people you'd ever meet, sometimes to a fault. They could never say no to anyone who needed help. I remember countless times when neighbors would come over, asking to borrow money or seeking advice, and my parents would always find a way to help. Once they even took in a stray cat that had been abandoned in our neighborhood, nursing it back to health despite our tight budget. That was just who they were. From as early as I can remember, they drilled two principles into my head. My father would often say them during dinner, his chopsticks pausing midair as he spoke with that gentle authority I came to associate with wisdom. Always repay kindness shown to you. Give without expecting anything in return. Sometimes I thought these ideals were a bit naive, especially during my rebellious early teens when I wanted to seem cooler and more cynical. But deep down, I was proud of my parents for living by their principles. We weren't anything special, but our peaceful daily life felt precious to me. That peace was shattered during my sophomore year of high school, on a day I'll never forget. It was early fall just after summer break, when the morning air had turned crisp and the maple leaves in our garden were beginning to show hints of red. I was heading out to school, adjusting my tie and grabbing my bag, when my mom stopped me at the door. Her face was ashen, and her hands trembled as she held her phone. "The police called," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father's been arrested. They're saying he sexually harassed someone on the train." "What?" I stared at her, uncomprehending. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "That's impossible! Dad would never..." At first, I thought it had to be a joke, or maybe one of those scam calls we had been warned about at school. But as I listened to the details spilling from my mother's trembling lips, watching her knuckles turn white as she gripped her phone, it became clear that this was really happening. My head started spinning, and the sunny autumn morning suddenly felt cold and hostile. When Mom and I arrived at the police station, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Dad's face, making him look older than his years. He sat hunched in a metal chair, his usually pristine suit wrinkled, his tie loosened. A female officer with a stern expression and perfectly pressed uniform stood nearby, her arms crossed as she explained the situation. The nameplate on her desk read, Officer Tanaka, but her cold demeanor made the name seem irrelevant. Dad took the train to work every morning, like thousands of other commuters. That day, he had been standing and holding onto a handrail, somewhat drowsy from the early hour. He stayed up late helping me with my math homework the night before. He was suddenly startled awake by a young woman's voice piercing through the morning quiet. "This man touched me!" The accusation rang through the crowded train car. A high school girl was pointing at him, tears streaming down her face. Before Dad could even process what was happening, another passenger, a muscular man in a business suit, had grabbed him and dragged him to the station staff. The whole scene played out like a nightmare, with confused passengers recording on their phones and muttering among themselves. "The victim, the high school student, has positively identified you," Officer Tanaka said coldly, not even bothering to look up from her paperwork. Scratching of her pen against paper seemed unnaturally loud in the small interview room. "I'm innocent! I would never do such a thing!" Dad protested, his voice cracking. I've never heard him sound so desperate before. "I was just standing there, half asleep. I must have stumbled when the train moved." "That's what they all say." She dismissed him without even making eye contact, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. I felt rage building inside me at her attitude, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. The injustice of it all made my blood boil. "How dare you treat him like this? You're just assuming he's guilty without any proof. My father would never." Mom placed a gentle hand on my arm, but I could feel her trembling too. The weight of her touch reminded me of all the times Dad had taught us to stay calm in difficult situations. But right now, staying calm felt impossible. Yet this officer was ready to arrest him based solely on the girl's accusation. It made no sense. The morning sunlight streaming through the window seemed to mock the darkness of our situation. I was about to protest further when... "Stop, Michael!" It was Dad who cut me off, his voice firm despite his exhausted appearance. Even in this situation, he sat straight-backed, maintaining his dignity. "No matter the situation, we shouldn't speak to others with disrespect. Remember what I've always taught you." "But Dad..." I could feel tears of frustration burning behind my eyes. "I know. Thank you for defending me, son." He gave me a tired smile, and I found myself at loss for words. Even now, he was thinking about teaching me the right way to behave. The lump in my throat grew larger. The process moved forward like a slow-motion nightmare. While Dad was released temporarily, the shadow of suspicion hung over him like a dark cloud. Our neighbors, who used to greet us warmly, now hurried past with averted eyes. The local grocery store where Mom worked part-time suddenly had no shifts available for her. After a family discussion around our dining table, the same table where we shared so many happy meals, we decided to hire a lawyer. The savings my parents had set aside for college education would have to be used for legal fees instead. The guilt of that knowledge ate at me, but both Mom and Dad insisted my future wasn't up for discussion. That's when we met him, the person who would change the course of my life. "I'm James Anderson. I'll do everything in my power to help you, Mr. Stevens." The young lawyer who had entered the consultation room carried himself with quiet confidence that immediately put us at ease. Though only in his late 20s, with a boyish face that made him look even younger, James had already had an impressive track record, particularly with false accusation cases like sexual harassment and theft. His office was modest but neat, with law books lining the walls and a few potted plants adding life to the space. He didn't just listen to Dad's side of the story, he took time to hear Mom's and my perspectives too, jotting down notes in a worn leather notebook. What struck me most was how he looked at each of us in the eye as we spoke, nodding thoughtfully and asking precise, intelligent questions. He became our family's strongest ally during this difficult time, a beacon of hope when everything else seemed dark. "Mr. Stevens, he said, leaning forward in his chair after we finished explaining everything.
I believe you. And more importantly, I think I can help prove your innocence.
The way he said it, not as a hollow promise, but as a simple statement of fact, made Mom burst into tears. Dad reached over and squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening. A few days later, James called us with excitement barely contained in his voice.
Mr. Stevens, I have great news. We found an eyewitness from that day.
It turned out that a college student who had been standing nearby had seen everything. She had been wearing headphones and reading a book, so she hadn't noticed the commotion at first, but she clearly remembered Dad standing still, holding the handrail, and definitely not touching anyone. She had come forward after seeing a notice James had posted online seeking witnesses. Thanks to James' tireless efforts in searching for evidence and this witness's testimony, Dad was finally proven innocent. The security camera footage from the station, while not showing the alleged incident clearly, supported the timeline the witness described. The case was dismissed. Words can't express how grateful we were to James. The day the charges were dropped, he refused to accept our thank you gift, saying simply, "Seeing justice served is all the thanks I need." While Dad was able to return to work, and his company fortunately stood by him throughout the ordeal, the damage was already done in other ways. The local news had reported on his arrest, but barely mentioned his exoneration. Rumors spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, but only the part about him being arrested, not about his innocence. Soon those whispers reached my high school. The change wasn't immediate, but it was unmistakable. First came the cold stares from classmates who used to chat with me during lunch, then the whispered comments behind my back, growing bolder each day. Before I knew it, I was completely isolated.
Hey, Stevens, your textbooks are falling apart. Guess that's what happens when your criminal dad has to pay settlement money, huh?
The ringleader of the bullying was Richard Thompson. He was tall for our age, with an athlete's build and kind of good looks that made teachers instinctively trust him. That made his bullying all the more effective. He knew exactly how to torment me while maintaining a perfect student image. Having my belongings rifled through and destroyed became a daily occurrence. Thompson would loudly call me criminal's kid and pour trash in front of everyone, timing his comments perfectly so teachers never caught him. His followers, because bullies always have followers, would laugh on cue, creating a chorus of mockery that followed me through the halls. Once I tried fighting back. When Thompson knocked my lunch tray out of my hands in the cafeteria, I swung at him in frustration. He dodged easily. Of course he did. He was on the boxing team. And I ended up being the one getting detention for starting a fight. The smirk on his face as I was led away by teachers still haunts me sometimes. Looking back now, they were just dumb kids acting out of ignorance and cruel impulses of youth. But at the time, their words and actions crushed my spirit. Each day felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing when the next explosion of harassment would come. The nightmare continued even after graduation. The high school I got into was quite far from home. I'd chosen it specifically because none of my middle school classmates were going there. What had seemed like a minor detail during the entrance exams became a major obstacle I hadn't anticipated. Getting there meant I had to take the train. What had once been a simple part of daily life, something I'd done without thinking since junior high, became an insurmountable wall. Every time I approached the station gates, memories of that day at the police station would flood back with crushing intensity. My father's exhausted face, the officer's cold voice, the whispers of the crowd. The flashbacks would paralyze me. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, and the ground beneath my feet would seem to sway. More than once, I found myself sitting on a bench outside the station, trying to catch my breath while commuters streamed past me. What if the same thing happened to me? Once that thought took root, every female passenger began to feel like a potential threat. I would press myself against the train doors, trying to maintain as much distance as possible from everyone else. When the train got crowded, I'd get off and wait for the next one, then the next one, until I was consistently late for school. It became impossible to continue attending school in that state of mind. The concerned looks from teachers turned to stern warnings about attendance. My grades, which had always been decent, began to plummet. Finally, after missing nearly 2 weeks straight, I made the decision to drop out. I still remember the moment I told my parents. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same place where we shared so many family meals, where Dad had helped me with homework, and Mom had served her famous curry rice that could cheer up even the worst day. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across their worried faces.
I'm so sorry, Michael. This is all my fault.
Dad hung his head, his shoulders slumping in a way I've never seen before. The proud principled man who had taught me about kindness and perseverance looked defeated. If only I had been better support for you. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mom's voice cracked as she reached across the table to grasp my hand. Her palm was warm and slightly rough from housework, just like always, but it trembled slightly. Watching my parents, my pride and joy, apologize over and over broke my heart. The tears wouldn't stop flowing, no matter how much I tried to hold them back. These were the people who had given me everything, who taught me right from wrong, who always believed in me, and now they were blaming themselves for my failure. No, please don't apologize, I managed to choke out. It's not your fault. I'm the one who's weak. I'm the one who can't even ride a train without panicking.
You're not weak.
Dad said firmly, raising his head to look me in the eye.
You're carrying a burden that no child should have to bear. We're the ones who failed to protect you.
Mom nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. Whatever you decide to do, we'll support you. Your father and I believe in you, Michael. We always will. Their unconditional support when I felt like I least deserved it made everything both better and worse. Better because I knew I wasn't alone. Worse because I felt even more guilty about disappointing them. The more I thought about my future, the more I hit walls I couldn't avoid. The modern world isn't built for people who can't use public transportation. Taking the train, being around women, these were unavoidable parts of living in society, especially in Tokyo where trains are the lifeblood of the city. Every time I faced these realities, despair would overwhelm me. I spent days in my room, attempting to study on my own, mostly staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what kind of life I could possibly build for myself with these limitations. That's when I remembered James's word from when we parted after Dad's case was resolved. He had handed me his business card, Christmas Professional, with his contact information embossed in simple black letters, and said with that same reassuring smile,
If you ever need anything, my door is always open.
With nowhere else to turn, I found myself drawn to his office. The walk there took an hour. I was avoiding trains at all cost. The early spring air was crisp and clean. Cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom, their pink petals occasionally drifting down to dust my shoulders. I felt like nature itself was trying to encourage me. The office building looked exactly as I remembered it, though somehow smaller now that I wasn't viewing it through the lens of crisis. While waiting in the room his assistant showed me to, I noticed small details I'd missed before. A carefully maintained pot of plants in the corner, the wall of law books with clearly worn spines suggesting frequent use, a slight coffee stain on the corner of his desk that made the whole place feel more human. The door burst open with enough force to make me jump.
Well, if it isn't Michael!
James entered, looking harried but pleased. His tie was slightly askew and he was juggling several files under one arm while holding a steaming cup of coffee in the other hand. Hi, it's been a while. I started to rise from my chair, but he waved me back down with his coffee hand, nearly spilling it in the process.
Sorry. Just a sec. Yes, Anderson Law Office.
Our greeting was interrupted by his phone ringing. He somehow managed to answer while setting down both his coffee and the files, though a few papers escaped and fluttered to the floor. As I was preparing to leave, thinking I caught him at a bad time, James put the call on hold and tapped my shoulder.
Sorry, Michael. Could you grab that calendar from the shelf? The blue one?
Sure. I stood, grateful for something to do with my hands.
Thanks. Oh, and could you clip these documents together? The ones that just tried to escape?
He grinned sheepishly, already back on his phone call. Okay. Before I knew it, I helped with several small tasks. Organizing files, refilling his coffee, even answering a simple client call to reschedule an appointment. The work gave my hands something to do, and my mind something to focus on besides my anxiety. I completely missed my chance to leave. About an hour later, James finally seemed to catch his breath and settled into his desk chair with a satisfied sigh. Following his lead, I sat back down on the sofa, realizing I felt more relaxed than I had in weeks.
Thanks for the help. Sorry about that. You came all this way and I put you to work instead.
He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, making it stand up even more. No, that's fine. Though I probably should have made an appointment first. I fidgeted with the hem of my jacket.
Nonsense! I told you to come any time, didn't I?
His carefree smile hadn't changed. Then his expression grew more serious as he studied my face.
Though I have to admit, you're looking a bit rough around the edges. When's the last time you had a proper meal?
Before I could answer, he was already standing up, grabbing his coat.
Come on, I know just the place. Best spaghetti in Tokyo, I guarantee it.
He took me to a small coffee shop nearby, the kind of place you'd walk right past if you didn't know it was there. The bell tinkled softly as we entered, and the aroma of coffee and garlic bread enveloped us. The place had an old-fashioned, peaceful atmosphere. Warm wooden tables, vintage posters on the walls, and soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Over plates of spaghetti, which was really amazing. I found myself telling him everything that had happened in the past 6 months. The words poured out of me like a dam breaking, and James just listened, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions to keep me talking. How rumors had spread throughout the neighborhood like wildfire, turning friendly faces into averted gazes. I had been bullied at school, with Thompson leading the charge, turning what should have been a safe place into a daily nightmare. How I'd had to drop out of my hard-earned place at high school because of my trauma, the train station becoming an insurmountable barrier. The spaghetti grew cold on my plate as I spoke about how much I hated them all. The girl who accused my father without a second thought about the life she would destroy. The officer who dismissed him without even looking him in the eye. Thompson who found such joy in tormenting me. All of them. And most of all, how much I hated myself for disappointing my parents. Their faces when I told them I was dropping out haunted me every night. They saved up for years to send me to a good high school, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I couldn't even last 3 months. Such a failure. Before I knew it, my tears were falling onto the empty plane in front of me. The clink of other diners' cutlery and soft jazz seemed far away, as if I was underwater.
I see. You've been through so much, Michael. You've done well to make it this far.
James's voice was gentle but firm, grounding me in the moment. He kept patting my head gently until I calmed down, not caring that we were in public or that I was probably making a scene. I'll never forget the warmth of that gesture. It reminded me of my father, but different. Where my father's touch carried the weight of parental responsibility, James's held the understanding of someone who had seen similar pain before. This man, who had only known me through one case, showed me such kindness. He became someone would always be grateful to, but I didn't realize then just how much more he would come to mean to me.
Hey, Michael,
he said after I finally stopped crying and managed to drink some water.
If you're interested, would you like to work part-time in my office?
What? I looked up at him. Sure, I must have misheard him.
We're short-staffed, and things often pile up, as you saw today.
He chuckled, gesturing to his perpetually messy desk visible through the coffee shop window.
The work might be more complicated than what you did today, but I'll teach you everything. It would really help me out. But of course, I'll pay you properly.
It was an offer too good to refuse. I agreed immediately, but James held up a finger, his expression turning serious.
While you work here, you need to study.
Study? I echoed, confused.
Yes, whatever path you choose later, having a high school diploma will help. If going to school is difficult, you could look into online programs. We even have a spare room at the office you could use for studying.
He leaned back in his chair, watching my reaction carefully.
What do you think? Can you do it?
I found myself staring back at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or condescension. But all I saw was genuine concern of something else. Expectation, maybe? Hope? Why are you being so kind to me? I finally asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at me. These conditions, they only benefit me. From your perspective, hiring a dropout and lending office space is nothing but trouble.
Benefits, huh?
He took a sip of his coffee, seeming to consider the question carefully.
Honestly, I hadn't even thought about that. Simply put, I guess I can't see this as someone else's problem.
Then James shared his own story, one that would change how I saw everything. He had a younger sister around my age, he explained, his expression growing somber. When she was in high school, she was sexually assaulted on a train during her commute. The coffee shop's warm atmosphere seemed to grow heavier as he spoke. His hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. Though the perpetrator was caught thanks to other passengers who witnessed the incident, the trauma left deep psychological scars. Like me, she couldn't take the train anymore and stopped going to school for a while. Similarity of our situations, though from opposite sides, struck me deeply.
Well, the situations are complete opposites, but similar in a way, don't you think?
James said, echoing my thoughts.
Both of you were robbed of your normal lives because of what happened on the train.
Yeah. I nodded slowly, processing this new information. How is your sister now?
It took time, and she had to repeat a year. She's overcome it. She's living normally now and attending college.
A small smile crossed his face, pride evident in his voice. Then his expression darkened.
But I still regret how I handled things back then.
Why? What do you mean? I leaned forward, drawn in by the pain in his voice.
I became a lawyer because I wanted to help people.
He began, tracing patterns in the condensation on his water glass.
I had just gotten my license. I was a complete rookie, but I was convinced that I could help my sister. I thought having a lawyer in the family would make everything easier, make the justice system work faster.
He paused, his eyes narrowing as if in pain, lost in memories.
But a novice lawyer with no track record couldn't do anything. Worse, I was so caught up in work that I couldn't even properly support her emotionally. In the end, only time helped her heal. While I was buried in law books and case files, trying to be her savior, What she really needed was just her brother. His hands clenched on the table, knuckles white with tension. His fingertips trembled slightly with suppressed frustration, and I noticed for the first time how young he really was. Not much older than me, really, just trying his best to protect someone he loved. That's when I realized how arrogant I'd been, thinking I could save people just because I became a lawyer. What nonsense. We're only human. There are always limits to what we can do. Understanding that made me useless when it really mattered.
James. I started to speak, but he shook his head.
So when I heard your story, I thought this time I want to help. I need to help. Maybe it's selfish of me. Maybe I'm just trying to make up for my past failures. But
he looked slightly embarrassed as he finished, raising his eyes to meet mine.
I want to do better this time.
His direct gaze made me straighten up instinctively. There was something about his honesty, his willingness to share his own failures that made me trust him completely.
Michael, what do you want to do from here on?
That was the question I've been asking myself all along, the one I've been too afraid to answer. Before this conversation, I wouldn't have had an answer. I would have mumbled something about figuring it out later, about needing more time. But after hearing James's story, after seeing how he turned his regrets into motivation to help others, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could do something similar. Maybe my experiences, painful as they were, could become something meaningful. I want to become someone who can help others without expecting anything in return. I said slowly, words feeling right as they left my mouth. Like my parents taught me. Like you're doing now. In the end, this was all I had. Rather than wallowing in self-pity or harboring resentment, I wanted to become someone who could extend a helping hand to others. That would be my way of repaying my parents and finding my own pride. Soft jazz playing in the background seemed to swell at that moment, as if underlining the importance of my decision. A warm breeze from the open window carried the scent of coffee and hope.
You'll definitely succeed, Michael.
James's voice held absolute conviction. You think so? I don't feel very confident yet. I looked down at my hands, still remembering how they trembled at the train station that morning.
You came on your own to meet me. You took that first step yourself. That's why I want to support you from behind. Let me help you.
He leaned forward, his eyes bright with enthusiasm.
Besides, did you notice something about today?
What do you mean?
You've been sitting here in this cafe surrounded by people, including women, for over an hour now, and you've been completely focused on our conversation, not your surroundings.
I blinked, suddenly aware of my environment. He was right. The cafe was fairly crowded, with several female customers at nearby tables. Yet I hadn't felt any of my usual panic. Something about the peaceful atmosphere, or maybe James's calming presence, had kept me grounded. James's words were strong and reassuring. They steadied my shaky foundation, bringing fresh tears to my eyes. But these were different from before. These were tears of relief, a hope. My life changed completely after that. Thanks to James's consideration, my work hours started at 11 a.m. to avoid rush hour trains. He even arranged for a taxi service for the first few weeks, until I felt ready to try the trains during off-peak hours. The office became my sanctuary. The spare room he mentioned turned out to be small but comfortable space with a desk, a comfortable chair, and a window overlooking a peaceful side street. He filled the shelves with both law books and high school textbooks, telling me I could study either whenever I needed a break from work. Balancing office work with online high school studies wasn't as difficult as I expected. The structure helped. Having a reason to get up every morning, a place to go, people who expected me to show up. The work itself was interesting too, even the mundane tasks like filing documents and organizing case materials. I'd always been a decent student, and being able to study from clean textbooks without harassment felt like a blessing. No more torn pages or cruel messages written in the margins. No more anxious glances over my shoulder while trying to concentrate. Plus, learning about law between tasks was generally interesting. James would often take time to explain the case he was working on, breaking down complex legal concepts into understandable pieces. He had a gift for teaching, making even the driest material come alive with real-world examples. As I worked at the office, my goals became increasingly concrete. I wanted to become a lawyer like James, someone who could support and stand by the vulnerable without discrimination, someone who could turn painful experiences into strength to help others. Then came another significant encounter that would change my life even more profoundly. Good morning. Oh. The words died in my throat as I stepped into the office one spring morning. There was an unfamiliar woman cleaning one of the desks, her long hair tied back neatly, movements precise and purposeful. She was beautiful, with gentle presence that somehow made the whole office feel warmer. The moment I registered this, memories floated back and my body tensed up. My hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white. The familiar panic started rising, the tightness in my chest, the quickening of my breath. Noticing my reaction, she stopped cleaning and looked up. Her eyes were kind, reminding me of my mother somehow. "Oh, are you Michael?" Her voice was soft but clear, like wind chimes. "How do you—" I managed to stammer, still frozen in the doorway.
Ah, Michael, good morning. Oh, I see you already met. Sorry for the surprise.
James hurried over from behind me, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. He was carrying his usual morning coffee, some of it sloshing over the rim as he moved. Looking slightly awkward, he stepped between us and introduced the woman to my confused face.
This is my sister I told you about.
"Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah. I work here part-time as executive assistant." She smiled warmly, and I could see the family resemblance. They had the same gentle eyes. As I relaxed slightly, Sarah continued speaking with the same warm expression. "I heard about you from my brother beforehand. I'm sorry. It must have been shocking to suddenly meet a woman when you're still dealing with that fear." "No, I should apologize for my rude reaction. I'm Michael Stevens." I managed to bow slightly, my heart rate gradually returning to normal. "Such good manners. Nice to meet you, Michael." Her smile brightened further, and something in my chest tightened again, but in a different way this time. My first impression of Sarah was that she was a mature, composed woman. She had the same reassuring presence as her brother, a kind person who seemed to naturally put others at ease. "I'm so sorry my hopeless brother didn't warn you ahead of time." She saw James a playful glare. "Huh?" I blinked at the sudden change in her tone.
Hey, that's harsh.
James protested, though he was grinning. "Oh? But it's true, isn't it? You're always saying yourself how you miss important details. Just last week you forgot about that client meeting until 5 minutes before." She counted off his mistakes on her fingers, each one making James wince dramatically. And apparently, like any beautiful flower, she had her thorns, especially when it came to teasing her brother. From that day on, I started working more shifts with Sarah. The office dynamic shifted subtly but noticeably with her presence. Where James had brought energy and passion, Sarah brought order and warmth. She had previously only worked between college classes, but now had more free time after finishing her credits. She began helping me with my studies too, proving to be an even more patient teacher than her brother. While James would get excited and rush ahead, Sarah had a knack for breaking things down into manageable pieces. "Ah, you made this mistake again," she said one afternoon, pointing to a math problem in my workbook. The late sunlight streaming through the window caught her hair, creating a soft halo effect. You're right. I'm still weak at proofs." I rubbed my temples, frustrated with myself. "Don't pick up my brother's bad habits," she warned, tapping my worksheet with her pen. "He always tries to solve everything in his head instead of writing out the steps." "Oh, and next mistake means you get a forehead flick." "Please no, those actually hurt," I protested, remembering the last time she followed through on that threat. For someone so gentle looking, she had surprisingly strong fingers. Don't worry. You're capable when you try." Her smile was encouraging, and something about the way she said it made me want to live up to her expectations. Thanks to Sarah's friendly but occasional strict guidance, I gradually became more comfortable around women. It started with her, then extended to the female clients who came to the office, then to passing women on the street. It began feeling silly to lump all women together and automatically be afraid of them. Sarah helped me see them as individuals again. Some kind like her, some strict like Officer Tanaka, some troubled like our clients. They're all just people trying to live their lives. The morning I managed my first rush hour train ride, I practically burst into the office, startling both siblings who were having their morning coffee. "Good morning!" I called out, probably too loudly for the early hour. "Michael? You're early! Was the train okay?" Sarah jumped up from her desk, concern and hope warring on her face. "It was tough, but I managed. I finally rode during rush hour." I couldn't keep the pride out of my voice. My hands were still slightly shaky, but I'd done it. "See? I told you could do it when you tried." Sarah's smile then was radiant, making my heart skip a beat. "Sarah, thank you." The words felt inadequate for everything she'd done for me, but her expression told me she understood. Before I knew it, I had even overcome my trauma. The train stations that had once been sources of panic became just another part of daily life again. Sometimes I even find myself looking forward to the commute, using the time to review my studies or just watch the city wake up. One day, about 6 months after starting at the office, I overheard James and Sarah talking when they thought I left for the day.
He's really changed, hasn't he?
James was saying, pride evident in his voice. Yes, Sarah agreed softly. But you know what's amazing? He didn't really change at all. He was always this strong. You just needed someone to remind him of it. Their words stayed with me, warming me from the inside out. I hadn't realized how much their faith in me had become a cornerstone of my recovery. 10 years had passed since then. The morning sun streamed through the familiar windows of Anderson Law Office as I adjusted my now well-worn suit, a gift from James when I passed the bar exam. Wearing a suit had become second nature, though I still remembered how stiff and formal it felt that first day. Nothing's changed, I murmured, running my hand along the smooth wooden railing of the staircase. The building where I'd spent almost every day until 5 years ago welcomed me looking exactly the same. Even the slight coffee stain on the reception desk remained, a memorial to one of James's more clumsy moments. It felt nostalgic. And that's where the unexpected reunion happened. The man who called out,
Excuse me,
in a condescending tone turned out to be none other than Thompson, my high school bully. Time had changed him somewhat. His hair was thinning slightly at the temples, and his once athletic frame had softened around the middle, but that arrogant bearing was unmistakable.
No way, Stevens? Still get that poor man's face.
His laugh was exactly as I remembered it, sharp and mocking, designed to draw attention from others. Long time no see. What are you doing here? I kept my voice neutral, though seeing him brought back a flood of memories I'd rather have left buried.
Huh? I work here.
He puffed out his chest proudly, straightening his off-the-rack suit. So you became a lawyer? I asked, genuinely curious despite myself.
Ha! I'm a paralegal. Though I'm planning to pass the bar exam this year and start making real lawyer money.
He smirked, adjusting his slightly crooked tie.
Wait. Sorry. Those must be some pretty foreign concepts for someone like you.
Still with the snide remarks. You haven't changed at all. I shook my head, somewhat disappointed. A decade had passed, and he was still stuck in the same mindset.
What? You got some nerve talking back to me like that, Stevens.
His face reddened, that familiar anger rising to the surface. He seemed stuck in high school mentality, still trying to establish the same hierarchy that had made him feel powerful back then. I wondered briefly what had happened in his life to keep him frozen in that mindset. I let out a sigh, which apparently irritated Thompson even more. His face grew redder, and a vein started pulsing in his temple.
What's with that attitude? And what are you even doing here?
He stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me just like in high school. That's none of your business. I held my ground, no longer the scared teenager he remembered.
Like hell it isn't. You're about to waste our distinguished attorney's time.
He jabbed a finger toward my chest, though he didn't quite dare to make contact. Waste, huh? I couldn't help but feel a mix of pity and irritation at his unchanged attitude.
We've got international lawyers here. Sorry, but this isn't the kind of firm that represents dropouts like you. Get lost.
His voice echoed through the office lobby, making a few heads turn our way. As he was ranting aggressively, his face growing redder by the second, a familiar voice called out from one of the inner offices. The sound of clicking heels against hardwood floor preceded her appearance. Oh, sir! It was Sarah, still as beautiful as she was 10 years ago, though now carrying herself with even more grace and authority. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she wore a crisp navy suit that perfectly matched mine. We bought them together last month. The moment Thompson saw her face, his aggressive demeanor crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. The transformation would have been comical if it wasn't so predictable. Man, he really hadn't changed at all.
Oh, Miss Executive Assistant? What do you mean by sir?
His voice had shifted completely, taking on that fawning tone I heard him use of teachers back in high school. Honestly, I told you I'd come get you, Mr. Stevens. Sarah walked straight to me, completely ignoring Thompson's suddenly ingratiating smile. She carried a stack of documents that I recognized as the merger agreement we've been working on. I'll admit, seeing Thompson's dumbfounded expression was pretty satisfying. His eyes darted between Sarah and me, his brain visibly struggling to process what was happening. Please stop calling me that, Sarah. I tried to maintain my professional demeanor, but I could feel a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. You should get used to it by now, shouldn't you, sir? Her eyes sparkled with familiar mischief. Even after all these years, she still found ways to tease me. Seriously, stop. It's embarrassing when you call me that. I could feel my ears getting red, just like they always did when she teased me. Meeting Sarah in person after so long was almost too much to handle. 5 years of managing our relationship across continents hadn't dulled the effect she had on me one bit. If anything, the separation had made my heart grow even fonder. Thompson, who had been watching our exchange in shock, suddenly found his voice again. It came out higher than usual, almost squeaky with disbelief.
Wait, what kind of joke is this? Him, a sir?
He looked between us again, as if expecting of one of us to reveal it was all an elaborate prank. Hi, that's quite a way to address one of our firm's attorneys. Sarah's voice carried that dangerous sweetness I learned to recognize over the years. It was the tone she used right before demolishing someone in a negotiation.
What? Attorney? But you dropped out.
Thompson's face had lost all its color now, making him look almost ghostly under the office lights. What ancient history are you talking about, Thompson? Yes, I'm an attorney. I kept my voice level, professional. The scared teenager I once was felt very far away in that moment. After getting my high school diploma through the online program, I had thrown myself into studying the bar exam of everything I had. Each late night surrounded by law books, each practice test, each mock trial, they all led me to this point. While gaining practical experience at James's firm, I was encouraged to study abroad. James had connections with a law school in America, and before I knew it, I was preparing for a new adventure. The 5 years I spent in America were challenging but transformative. Learning a new legal system, adapting to a different culture, building an international network. Each challenge made me stronger. I just returned to Japan today after obtaining my U.S. law license, ready to bring my expanded expertise back to the firm that had given me my second chance. I didn't feel the need to explain all this to Thompson, so I stayed quiet. His jaw worked slowly, like rusty hinges trying to process information they weren't designed to handle.
That's impossible. This must be fraud, Stevens.
His voice cracked slightly, desperation creeping in. What? That makes no sense. I sighed, feeling increasingly tired of this conversation.
Because there was no way you could be a lawyer. A dropout like you.
He was practically sputtering now, his face turning an alarming shade of purple.
Hey, Miss Assistant, you don't know about this guy. Him being a lawyer is impossible.
Oh? And why is that? Sarah's smile contained multiple thorns, though Thompson didn't notice as he grinned smugly, thinking he'd found an ally.
His dad was a sex offender. He's the son of a criminal.
Thompson's voice carried through the office like a gunshot. What? Sarah's voice had gone dangerously quiet.
I know, right? Unbelievable. He probably thinks if he acts cool, no one will find out. The nerve of this guy, getting above himself.
His half-laughing comments now felt trivial. Just, oh, this again. The words that had once had the power to destroy me now seemed pathetically small. I realized I truly moved past it all. The pain was still there, like an old scar, but it no longer had the power to control me. However, Sarah was the one who exploded in anger. I had seen her angry before, at unfair prosecutors, at clients who lied, at her brother's occasional recklessness, but never like this. How dare you! Her voice cut through the air like a whip. A sharp slap echoed through the office, the sound seeming to bounce off every wall. Sarah had struck Thompson across the face with enough force to make him stagger backward. Do you have any idea what he and I went through because of people like you? Sarah's voice trembled with rage. Of course not. Your empty head couldn't possibly comprehend it, you disgusting creature. Her words carried the weight of a decade, not just my pain, but her own trauma. All the cases we worked on together, all the victims we'd helped. She'd seen firsthand how false accusations and bullying could destroy lives. Whoa, wait, Sarah! I reached for her, but another voice beat me to it.
Long time no see, Michael. Sorry for the unpleasant welcome.
James, who must have just arrived, placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder as she prepared to strike again. He looked exactly as I remembered, though there were a few more silver strands in his internally messy hair. No, it's good to see you, James. I smiled at my mentor, my brother-in-law, my friend.
Hey, you can finally start calling me brother-in-law, you know.
His eyes twinkled with the same mischief his sister often showed.
What?
Thompson's shocked exclamation reminded us of his presence. Oh, shut up, you idiot brother. Save your silly jokes for later. Don't stop me. Sarah tried to shake off James's restraining hand, her whole body trembling with suppressed anger.
Scary. Just calm down first.
James's tone was light, but his grip on her shoulder was firm. While calming his still trembling sister, James fixed Thompson with a sharp glare. The playful brother was gone, replaced by the formidable attorney I watched win countless cases. Thompson's face twisted on an intense gaze. He seemed to shrink in on himself, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning dew.
I heard enough of the conversation,
James said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had intimidated many opposing counsels.
I'm afraid you no longer have any place in this firm.
What? What right do you have to?
Thompson's protest came out as a whisper.
The right of the law firm's owner?
James' voice was soft but carried easily in the silent office.
Don't you dare to think about becoming a lawyer if you can't support people in vulnerable positions.
The words seemed to physically strike Thompson. His throat convulsed as he looked away, unable to meet James's stern gaze. When his eyes met mine, they narrowed reflectively. It last a desperate attempt to maintain his old power. At this point, I almost pitied how his mind couldn't process the situation. He was still stuck in that high school hierarchy, unable to see how the world had moved on without him. Any words would be wasted on him now. Realizing he was that kind of person, someone so trapped in the past that he couldn't grow or change, I watched emotionlessly as security escorted him out of the office. His protest grew fainter as he disappeared down the hallway, like a ghost from my past finally being exorcised.
Really? I heard bad things about Thompson before from other staff members, but this...
James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times when he was troubled.
I'll report this to the Bar Association for disciplinary action. This kind of behavior has no place in our profession.
Thank you for handling it. I meant it sincerely. Even after all these years, James was still looking out for me.
Don't worry about it.
He gave me a bright smile, the kind that made his whole face light up.
What? Could you take care of Sarah? She seems pretty shaken up.
Of course. After giving me a knowing look, James left the room, phone already in hand to make the necessary calls. The sound of his voice faded as he walked down the hallway, leaving Sarah and me alone in the suddenly quiet office. I don't care what happens to Thompson anymore. Right now, Sarah needs attention. She was still trembling slightly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Sarah? Are you okay? I stepped closer, wanting to comfort her but unsure how. I'm fine. She took a deep breath, professional composure slowly returning. I'm sorry for losing my composure. I just couldn't forgive him for saying things that hurt my past self, that hurt you. I'd never seen Sarah show anger like this before. She was always the composed one, the voice of reason when James or I got too emotional about a case. Seeing her lose control like this, especially on my behalf, made my heart swell with love for her. I gently placed my palm against her cheek, which was still contorted with frustration. Her skin was warm beneath my touch, and she leaned into it slightly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Thompson got lucky, I said softly. Huh? She looked up at me, confusion replacing anger in her eyes. If James had been 1 second later, I would have punched him. Getting slapped by such a beautiful woman, you should count as blessings. I tried to keep my face serious, but I could feel my lips twitching. Michael, you really should have studied American humor more while you were over there. But she was fighting back a smile now too. Harsh as ever, Mrs. Anderson. I pulled her closer, braving in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Seeing Sarah return a bit to her usual self, I felt myself relax too. The confrontation with Thompson had shaken loose some old memories, but they no longer had any power over me. I was happy you got angry for me. Thank you, Sarah. I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Of course, you're not just anyone after all. Her smile then was more beautiful than ever, reminding me of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. Later, I heard Thompson was put on probation by the Bar Association. The investigation revealed other instances of unprofessional behavior. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he tried to intimidate or belittle. A pattern of misconduct that stretched back years, all stemming from that same high school bully mentality. Apparently, he's still taking the bar exam repeatedly, though with no success in light. Some of our colleagues in other firms mentioned seeing him at prep courses, still wearing that same chip on his shoulder. I don't know if he's still working as a paralegal somewhere, but I haven't seen him since then. Part of me hopes he'll eventually learn and grow from this experience. That's up to him now. What are you spacing out about, sir? Sarah's voice pulls me back to the present. She's standing in the doorway of my office, our office now, holding a stack of case files. Oh, sorry. Just remembering various things. The morning sun catches her wedding ring as she sets the files down, sending little rainbows dancing across the wall. Looking pretty relaxed during work hours, aren't we, Anderson Counsel? She raises an eyebrow, but her eyes are sparkling with that familiar mischief. Stop taking after your brother so much, Mrs. Anderson. I counter, reaching for her hand.
Both of you, stop teasing.
James' voice floats in from the next room, followed by his familiar laugh. I'm now officially married to Sarah and working as James's right-hand man. The three of us make a formidable team, each bringing our own strengths to the firm. James with his brilliant legal mind and boundless compassion, Sheriff for sharp insight and organizational skills, and me with my determination and understanding of both sides of justice. Slowly but surely, I'm growing in this field. Each case teaches me something new. Each client helps me understand human nature a little better. A scared teenager who couldn't ride the train is now someone who travels internationally for cases, who stands up in court to defend others, who helps people find their way through their darkest moments. I know well enough that what little old me can do is limited. Sometimes we lose cases despite our best efforts. Sometimes we can't help everyone who comes to us. Sometimes justice feels just out of reach. That's probably true for everyone. That's what makes us human. Our limitations, our struggles, and our determination to keep trying anyway. We humans aren't gods. We're always powerless in some way. There will always be things we can't do alone. Battles we can't win by ourselves. That's why we need each other. Why connections like the ones I found here are so precious. It's impossible to save everyone we see, but that's exactly why we keep trying. Why we put in the effort day after day. Each small victory, each person we help becomes part of something larger than ourselves. These small humans can evolve one step at a time. I've seen it in myself, in our clients, even in the system we work within. Change is possible. Healing is possible. Growth is possible, as long as we don't give up. That's why we're equipped with the energy called effort. It's what drives us forward, what helps us overcome our past traumas and face new challenges. It's what turned a bully dropout into a successful attorney, what transformed victim into advocates, what builds bridges between past and future. Well, time to keep working hard today too. Another case awaits on my desk, another chance to make a difference. Sarah smiles at me from her desk. James calls out a question about a legal precedent, and life goes on. Believing that each step leads to saving someone else. That's what keeps me going, what makes every challenge worthwhile. After all, that's what my parents taught me, what James showed me, what Sarah reminds me of every day. The power of extending a helping hand without expecting anything in return. And somehow, I think that scared teenager riding the train alone would be proud of where he ended up.